Most players I see will play their commander as soon as they can, drop their synergy cards as fast as possible, and empty their hand as quickly as their mana allows. Which makes sense. We tend to think about our decks as a formula. This plus this equals fun. I'll do my synergy thing. But in casual EDH, you run into a issue when you dump your entire hand. Board wipes. There are so many of them in the format, and in casual EDH, players have the time to cast the really crazy powerful ones. And lining up all of your deck's most important pieces such that they get swept up in the same board wipe will set you up to lose games. Which is why holding back some things in hand can be a powerful thing to do. So I want to talk about sandbagging and how to avoid getting destroyed by a Wrath. But first, if you want to buy any of these cards I talk about here, consider going to Cool Stuff Inc. and using the code TTM at checkout for a discount. It also supports the channel. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the video. Sandbagging is the idea of holding back, and in casual EDH, this is a very important skill. In Commander, since there are 3 opponents, spot removal is not super efficient. So many people will play some amount of board wipes to hit everything, allowing them to catch up if they're behind. And having 5 of your cards swept away by one of your opponents is the fast track to running out of cards and losing. This is where sandbagging comes in. If instead you don't dump all of your cards, you won't get them destroyed in a board wipe. But sandbagging does not just involve board wipes. Like I said, spot removal is not super efficient, but people still play it, and there are times where it is better than a board wipe. If you're the first player to cast a big scary creature, then your opponent's first target is going to be your stuff. And when we look at non-creature removal, this is usually relegated to just a few spots in the 99 of someone's deck. Meaning if you play a big non-creature spell, your opponent is going to be looking at that disenchant that's been sitting in their hand for 2 turns and really want to cast it on your thing specifically. Personally, I often try not to be the biggest threat at the table, playing some value pieces but never overcommitting to the board. I'll happily take damage in the early game if it means my opponents play more cards into my board wipe. This is why waiting for others to drop their big bombs and draw out removal can be really good. Additionally, becoming the arch enemy on an early turn, leading everyone to just focus you down, means you're probably not going to win that game. Sandbagging also helps speed up games. Seems counterintuitive, but it is true. A lot of times when you think of a casual EDH game going really long, it's because everybody dumped their hand, there was a board wipe, and then they go to top deck mode, slowly rebuilding, and then another board wipe happens. But if you prepared for a Wrath, sandbagging, after the board wipe is cast, you can actually deploy your threats early onto a clear board and swing in for big damage. But of course, this leads to a whole separate issue. If you don't play any cards, how do you win? And what happens if everybody is sandbagging? Won't that just lead to the strongest late game deck winning all the time? There is an important factor to consider when sandbagging, and that's speed. We can put every deck on a line of slowest to fastest. The fastest are all-in combo decks looking to win on turns 1 to 4. And the slowest decks are the grindiest, controlliest stacks decks aiming to win on turn 1000. Most casual decks fall somewhere in the middle, trying to win on turns 7 to 10-ish depending on power level and playgroup. The earlier a deck wants to win, the more all-in its combo tends to be. And the later a deck wants to win, usually the less combo-oriented and the more control-y the finisher is. Typically speaking, control decks are the strongest in the late game. They have the most card advantage and removal. And then combo decks are the most lethal. So if you are going for a fast combo, by all means, play your cards, since if your opponent doesn't have the removal right then and there, you just win the game. Hell, you could just scoop it up if your combo gets stopped, if that's the type of deck you want to play. Now, if you're playing a control deck, and your deck is the strongest in the late game, then you should be sandbagging and holding onto that removal as long as you can so you get as many of your opponent's cards with one sweeper. But most players are not playing draw go control, nor are most players playing fast combo in casual EDH. The art of sandbagging becomes most interesting when everyone is playing casual mid-range decks. Deciding to sandbag or not is less simple when you can't tell if you're the fastest or slowest deck at the table. As an example, let's look at my Tormod Sidar list. This deck can do some late game control-y things, but it's not looking to draw out the game. I'm trying to attack with my zombies and swing in for lethal relatively early. So would I be the fastest or slowest deck at this table? It's hard to tell, but there are a few signs that will let you know whether or not you should be sandbagging. But first, if you like my content, consider subscribing and checking out the Patreon. It really helps. Thanks. Let's look at some situations to help you determine if you should sandbag. First, is someone else also sandbagging? Let's say you see a deck at the table and they're playing a bit weird. Maybe they have a full grip of cards, but haven't cast anything. Or they only deployed a very small creature or small threat here or there. They could be waiting for others to commit to the board before dropping a wrath. In this case, I want to recommend sandbagging as well, but less than them by a little bit. Let's stick with the Sidar Tormod example. I might cast Sidar and use some of my 2-power creatures to attack the other person who's sandbagging, hitting them for 4 or 6 a turn. This puts a little bit of pressure on them, forcing that player to make a hard decision. Do they take another 6 damage or use a board wipe? Pressuring the other player who's sandbagging is really great. If you can force them to use the board wipe, then you got to hold on to your cards and your board wipe, putting you way ahead of the rest of the table. Pressuring them is really great using a specific type of creature. I don't have a good name for this, so I'll call them expendable aggro creatures. But these are low-cost, efficient, early-game threats that can deal reasonable damage or create value. Some examples could be like Chasm Skulker, Atsushi the Blazing Sky, Uvenwald Hydra. Chasm Skulker gets more threatening every single turn that it's around and has a death trigger. Atsushi flies through the air for chip damage and also dies to a board wipe and gives you something in return. And then ETB creatures like the Hydra are great because it's big, it provides pressure, and also, even if it's died, you already got the enter the battlefield effect and had some value happen. And when you're attacking the other player who's sandbagging, forcing them to use the removal spell before they wanted to can mess up their game plan. Here's another situation. Your opponents are clearly not sandbagging. They're just dumping their hands as quickly as they can. This is pretty easy for you. Hold back your threats as much as you can without taking too much damage. Maybe play 1 or 2 things to chump block or avoid getting attacked too much. And then once some of the players are empty-handed or low on cards, cast your board wipe and just take the game over from there. Third example, what if you have the opportunity to not sandbag? Maybe not a game-winning combo, but let's say you hit some good ramp early game and you found one of your big value pieces, like a token doubler or like a 1,000-Year Storm. Should you play the big bomb? This is probably going to depend where we are in the game and what your opponents are on. If you were in a if I untap with this, I win situation, maybe it could be worth playing just because it's a removal check. You can go for the win. And especially if someone else has also cast a powerful thing and eaten 1 removal spell, you really should just go for it. But even when I hit an early start, I'm not going to play my most crucial, powerful piece immediately because I really just don't want it to get taken out first thing. Even if I have the opportunity, since none of my casual decks are so fast that I'm going to just win in the next turn or 2 after playing my big thing, I would rather just wait a sec. Give it another turn or 2, let someone else cast something first. Of course, these were just some example situations, and you'll run into 1,000 different variations. And I'm not saying you should never cast your cards. It's just you should think twice about committing to the board. Overextending, dumping your hand, and setting yourself up to have all of your best cards swept away is a really common mistake I see from players, and you're just setting yourself up to lose. Knowing exactly how much to commit to the board and when you should hold back will depend on your deck, what your opponents are playing, and your playgroup in general. And sandbagging, of course, is not the only solution. I am a firm believer that you want to play protection spells if you have a deck that commits to the board. It will help you keep your key pieces in play. If you have a Teferi's Pro in hand, maybe you don't need to hold back so much. In general, you can boil this video down to these simple ideas. If your opponents are more controlled than you should sandbag a little and force that player to play removal, pressuring them with your expendable creatures. If your opponent is more aggro than you should try to sandbag as much as you can and wipe away as many of their threats in one go. So stop setting yourself up to lose, lining up your 4, 5, and 6 drops just for a board wipe to knock them down. Board wipes in Casual Commander are comically powerful, and we seem to keep getting more of them. There are powerful board wipes in most sets these days, so don't expect this idea of getting wrathed away to go away anytime soon. Whether or not Wizards should print all of these crazy board wipes is another video for another day though. So I'll close this off by asking you, how do you feel about sandbagging? Do you do this? Does it annoy you? Let me know in the comments below. Special thanks to my patrons who make these videos possible. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon. You could be in the credits like my tier 3 patrons are here.